The Galactic Council's military academy on Zentara Prime buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered for the annual joint training exercise. Admiral Kethavar, a towering Zolonian with crystalline skin that reflected the twin suns, stood before the assembled troops with obvious disdain etched across his angular features. "This year," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military tradition, "we welcome our newest members to the Galactic Defense Force." His 6 eyes focused on a small group of bipedal creatures standing awkwardly at the back of the formation. The humans. A ripple of barely contained laughter swept through the ranks. The Crithari, with their massive frames and natural armor plating, exchanged amused glances. The quick-moving Solari twittered amongst themselves, their feathered crests dancing with mirth. Even the disciplined Vorthak, known for their stoic nature, seemed to struggle maintaining their composure. Captain Sarah Chen stood perfectly still among her human squad, her jaw clenched as she watched her teammates shuffle uncomfortably. Private Marcus Webb nearly dropped his rifle during inspection. Sergeant Tom Rodriguez stumbled slightly while forming ranks. Lieutenant Amy Foster's equipment rattled loudly with each step. To any observer, they looked like children playing soldier. "The exercise begins at dawn," Admiral Kethvar continued, his tone suggesting he expected little from the human contingent. "Each species will demonstrate their combat capabilities in a series of war games. The Crithari will show their famous heavy assault tactics. The Solari will display their aerial reconnaissance mastery. The Vorthak will demonstrate their precision energy weapons." He paused, his multiple eyes scanning the humans with unconcealed skepticism. "The humans will participate." Later that evening, in the cramped quarters assigned to the human delegation, the team gathered around their mission briefings. The contrast between their accommodations and those of the other species was stark. While the Crithari enjoyed reinforced chambers designed for their massive frames, and the Solari had elevated perches suited to their aerial nature, the humans made do with basic military cots and what appeared to be a storage room. "They think we're a joke," muttered Private Webb, cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that day. "Did you see how they looked at us during the equipment demonstration?" "Can you blame them?" replied Sergeant Rodriguez, examining a topographical map of tomorrow's exercise area. "We can't fly like the Solari, we don't have natural armor like the Crithari, and our reflexes are nowhere near as fast as the Vorthak." Captain Chen remained silent, studying the terrain maps with intense concentration. Her fingers traced elevation lines and natural cover points with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to see opportunity where others saw only obstacles. Behind her quiet demeanor lay years of experience in asymmetric warfare. Knowledge gained from humanity's long history of conflicts where superior firepower meant nothing without superior tactics. "What's our assignment for tomorrow?" asked Lieutenant Foster, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be glamorous. "Reconnaissance and target designation," Chen replied without looking up from her maps. "We're supposed to identify enemy positions and relay coordinates to the main assault teams." "Support role," Webb said bitterly. "They're keeping us out of the real fighting." "Maybe that's exactly where we want to be," Chen said quietly, finally looking up from her maps. There was something in her eyes that made the others lean in closer. "While they're all focused on their big, dramatic frontal assaults, who do you think will actually be watching the battlefield?" The next morning arrived with the harsh light of Zentara Prime's twin suns. The exercise area stretched across 50 square kilometers of varied terrain, from dense forests to rocky hills to open plains. Holographic enemy positions had been established throughout the area, defended by automated systems that would test each team's combat effectiveness. As the various species prepared for battle, the differences in their approaches became immediately apparent. The Crithari moved in tight formations, their heavy weapons gleaming in the morning light. Their strategy was simple and effective, overwhelming firepower applied directly to the problem. They had conquered dozens of worlds using this exact approach. The Solari took to the air in graceful formations, their natural wings carrying them effortlessly above the battlefield. Their reconnaissance capabilities were legendary throughout the galaxy, and their ability to strike from unexpected angles had turned the tide of countless conflicts. The Vorthak prepared their precision energy weapons with methodical efficiency. Each member of their team was a master marksman, capable of hitting targets at ranges that defied belief. Their technology was centuries ahead of most galactic civilizations. The humans, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling with basic equipment checks. Webb's communications gear emitted an embarrassing squeal of feedback. Rodriguez's pack appeared to be improperly secured. Foster's optical scope fogged up in the morning humidity. Admiral Kethvar watched the preparations with growing irritation. "Perhaps," he muttered to his aide, "we were premature in extending membership to these primitives." But Captain Chen was watching something else entirely. While the other species focused on their impressive displays of technology and natural ability, she was studying the terrain with the eye of a predator. Every ridgeline, every shadow, every potential firing position was being catalogued and assessed. As the exercise began, the various teams moved out according to their species' strengths. The Crethari advanced with unstoppable momentum across the open plains. The Solari soared overhead, their keen eyes scanning for targets. The Vorthak took up positions on elevated ground, their energy weapons already powering up for long-range engagement. The humans, they seemed to simply disappear into the landscape, moving with a peculiar combination of clumsiness and purpose that left the observing officers scratching their heads in confusion. 3 hours into the exercise, Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center, watching holographic displays track the progress of each team with growing frustration. The Crethari had successfully eliminated 2 major target complexes through sheer brute force, their massive weapons reducing defensive positions to glowing craters. The Solari had identified 17 enemy positions from their aerial vantage points, their natural flight capabilities giving them unparalleled reconnaissance advantages. The Vorthak had demonstrated their legendary precision, eliminating high-value targets from distances that impressed even the cynical admiral. Their energy weapons could punch through armor plating that would laugh off conventional projectiles. And the humans? They had seemingly vanished into the landscape without accomplishing anything measurable. "Where exactly are they?" Kethvar demanded, his crystalline features reflecting his irritation as he stared at the tactical display. The human team's transponder signals showed they were scattered across a heavily forested section of the exercise area, but their actual positions seemed almost random. Still conducting reconnaissance, "Sir," reported Lieutenant Vextar, a junior Zolonian officer monitoring communications. "They've been maintaining radio silence for the past 2 hours." Radio silence during a training exercise? Kethvar's voice carried the disbelief of someone who had never encountered such unconventional tactics. How are they coordinating? How are they sharing intelligence? What the Admiral couldn't see was the intricate dance of hand signals and carefully planned movements that Captain Chen had drilled into her team during months of preparation. While other species relied on advanced technology or natural abilities, humans had developed something far more dangerous: the ability to adapt and improvise under impossible circumstances. Sergeant Rodriguez lay motionless beneath a camouflaged tarp, his body covered in local vegetation that he had carefully selected to match the surrounding environment. To any observer, including the sophisticated sensors of the exercise monitoring system, he appeared to be nothing more than another fallen log in the forest floor, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every detail of the enemy defensive position just 200 meters away. Private Webb had discovered something the other teams had completely missed: a network of natural caves that honeycombed the rocky hills surrounding the primary target zone. While the Crethari smashed through obvious defensive positions, and the Silari conducted aerial reconnaissance of surface installations, Webb was mapping an underground approach route that would bypass every sensor and defensive system in the area. Lieutenant Foster had positioned herself on a ridge that every other team had dismissed as tactically useless. The position offered no obvious advantages, had poor cover, and was exposed to fire from multiple directions, which was exactly why no one was watching it. From her carefully concealed position, she had a perfect view of 3 separate target complexes that were considered impregnable by conventional assault. Captain Chen moved through the forest like a ghost, using techniques that her grandmother had learned from Apache scouts and her father had refined in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Every step was placed with deliberate care, every movement calculated to avoid detection. She was gathering intelligence that would make the difference between victory and defeat. But to outside observers, she simply appeared to be wandering aimlessly through the woods. Back in the command center, the other species leaders were growing increasingly confident. General Thrax of the Krathari forces flexed his massive arms as he watched his troops systematically reduce enemy positions to rubble. Perhaps, he rumbled in his bass voice, we were correct to question the humans' inclusion in this alliance. Warriors must prove themselves in battle, not hide in shadows. Wing Commander Scylla of the Solari preened her feathers with satisfaction as her scouts reported the locations of 17 confirmed enemy positions. My people have given our allies every advantage, she chirped, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. Victory should be assured with such superior intelligence. Marshal Vorthkon of the Vorthak delegation studied the tactical displays with cold calculation. The enemy defensive positions are well placed, but not beyond our capabilities. Our precision strikes will eliminate their command structure within the hour. Only Admiral Kethvar seemed troubled by what he was seeing. His long military experience had taught him to be suspicious of easy victories and obvious solutions. Something about this exercise felt wrong, though he couldn't quite identify what was bothering him. Sir, Lieutenant Vextar called out suddenly, we're receiving a transmission from the human team. Finally, Kethvar muttered. Perhaps they've realized they're out of their depth. But the voice that came through the communication system wasn't requesting assistance or reporting failure. Captain Chen's calm, professional tone cut through the command center like a blade. Command, this is human team leader. We have completed our reconnaissance mission and are ready to provide target designation for Allied forces. About time, General Thrax growled. What positions have you identified? There was a brief pause before Chen's response, and when it came, it carried a note of quiet confidence that made several officers in the command center exchange glances. We have identified 37 enemy positions, including 12 that are currently undetected by Allied forces. We have also mapped 3 alternative approach routes that will allow for coordinated strikes against the primary objective without triggering the automated defense systems. The command center fell silent. 37 positions? The Solari, with their superior aerial reconnaissance, had only found 17. How had the clumsy humans identified more than twice as many targets? Impossible, Wing Commander Scylla protested, her feathers ruffling with indignation. My scouts have conducted complete aerial surveys of the entire exercise area. There are no hidden positions. With respect, Wing Commander, Chen's voice remained perfectly calm. Your aerial reconnaissance is excellent for identifying surface installations and obvious defensive positions. However, it appears that several enemy positions have been designed to exploit the blind spots in traditional reconnaissance methods. Before anyone could respond, Foster's voice joined the communication. Command, this is Human Team Scout 2. I have visual confirmation on a series of underground bunkers connected by tunnel systems. The entrance points are camouflaged and would be invisible from aerial surveillance. Then Webb's voice. Human Team Scout 3 reporting. I've mapped the tunnel network from the inside. The enemy has established a secondary command center, approximately 400 meters below ground level. This position appears to be the actual control center for the entire defensive network. The command center erupted into confused chatter as the implications became clear. While the other teams had been engaging obvious targets and visible defenses, the humans had discovered that the real battle was taking place on a completely different level. The impressive victories that the Krathari, Solari, and Vorthak had achieved were essentially meaningless if the enemy's true command structure remained intact. Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display in stunned silence as the human reconnaissance data integrated with the existing battle map. What had appeared to be a straightforward exercise with clearly defined objectives suddenly revealed itself as something far more complex and sophisticated. The underground command center that Private Webb had discovered was connected to every defensive position on the surface through a network of tunnels and communication lines. More importantly, it was positioned directly beneath what appeared to be empty terrain, completely invisible to conventional reconnaissance methods. How did you find this? Kethvar demanded, his multiple eyes focused intently on the display showing Webb's current position deep underground. Sir, humans have a long history of tunnel warfare, came Webb's voice through the communication system, slightly distorted by the rock and earth above him. During our conflicts on Earth, we learned that the enemy often builds obvious defensive positions to distract from their real strongholds. When I saw how perfectly placed the surface defenses were, I started looking for what they were really protecting. General Thrax's massive frame shifted uncomfortably as he studied the new intelligence. His forces had spent hours reducing surface positions to rubble, but now it appeared that they had been fighting shadows while the real enemy remained completely untouched. "These tunnels," he rumbled uncertainly. "My warriors cannot fit through such narrow passages. Our weapons are designed for open warfare, not underground fighting." Wing Commander Scylla's agitation was visible in the rapid twitching of her feathers. "My people require open air to maneuver effectively. We cannot operate in confined underground spaces." Marshal Vorthkon examined the tunnel specifications with cold efficiency. "Our energy weapons would be ineffective in such close quarters. The risk of cave-ins and structural collapse would be unacceptable." For the first time since the exercise began, Admiral Kethvar found himself looking at the human team with something approaching respect. Every other species in the Galactic Alliance possessed natural advantages that made them formidable in specific types of warfare. But those same advantages became limitations when the battlefield didn't conform to their expectations. "Captain Chen," Kethvar's voice carried a new note of professional interest. "What do you recommend?" Chen's response came immediately, as if she had been waiting for exactly this question. "Sir, request permission to demonstrate human combat capabilities in close-quarters underground warfare." "Granted. But Captain, your team has no backup. If you encounter serious resistance down there—" "Understood, sir. We'll adapt to the situation as it develops." What happened next would be discussed in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. While the other species had brought their most advanced technology and relied on their natural advantages, the humans descended into the tunnel network with equipment that seemed almost primitive by galactic standards. But primitive didn't mean ineffective. "Captain." Chen moved through the narrow passages with fluid grace, her movements economical and purposeful. Years of training in urban warfare and tunnel-clearing operations had prepared her for exactly this type of environment. Behind her, Sergeant Rodriguez provided overwatch with weapons designed for close-quarters combat, while Lieutenant Foster used night vision equipment to map intersection points and defensive positions. The tunnel system was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Multiple levels connected through vertical shafts with defensive positions built into natural choke points. The underground command center was protected by layers of automated defenses that would have been impossible to detect from the surface. "Command, this is Human Team Leader." Chen's voice came through clearly despite the depth and interference. "We have identified the primary defensive control systems. The surface installations are being directed from 3 separate control nodes down here. If we can eliminate these nodes, the entire defensive network will be neutralized." "How do you intend to accomplish this?" Admiral Kethvar asked. "Our scanners show significant automated defenses protecting those positions." "Sir, humans have developed specialized techniques for defeating automated defense systems. We call it thinking outside the box." What Chen didn't explain was that humans had spent centuries fighting opponents with superior technology and natural advantages. They had learned that the key to victory wasn't matching the enemy's strengths, but rather finding weaknesses that the enemy didn't even know existed. Sergeant Rodriguez had discovered that the automated defense turrets were programmed to track movement and heat signatures, but they weren't programmed to recognize threats that moved in ways that violated their basic parameters. By crawling along the tunnel walls using techniques borrowed from rock climbing, he was able to approach defensive positions from angles that the turrets literally couldn't comprehend. Lieutenant Foster found that the underground command center's communication systems relied on buried fiber optic cables that the designers assumed would be impossible to locate and cut. But humans had developed cable-laying techniques that left predictable patterns, and Foster had spent years working with communication infrastructure. She knew exactly where to look and exactly how to disable the connections without triggering backup systems. Private Web made the most important discovery of all. The underground facility had been designed by engineers who thought in terms of conventional military tactics. They had built impressive defenses against frontal assaults, sophisticated countermeasures against technology-based attacks, and multiple redundant systems to prevent catastrophic failure. But they hadn't planned for someone who would simply walk up to the main power distribution panel and rewire it to create a cascading feedback loop that would shut down the entire facility in a controlled sequence. It's basic electrical engineering. Webb explained to the stunned command center, as power levels throughout the underground complex began dropping in carefully orchestrated stages. Every system has vulnerabilities if you understand how it's designed to work. You just have to be willing to think like the original engineers and then do something they never expected. As the underground command center went dark, every defensive position on the surface suddenly fell silent. Weapon systems that had been tracking the Krathari forces stopped moving. Sensor networks that had been monitoring Solari reconnaissance flights shut down. Energy shields that had been deflecting Vorthak precision strikes simply disappeared. The exercise was over, and the humans had won it without firing a single shot. The command center erupted into chaos as the implications of what had just happened began to sink in. General Thrax stared at the tactical display in disbelief, as his massive assault forces found themselves standing among silent defensive positions that moments before had been impregnable fortresses. Wing Commander Scylla's aerial reconnaissance team circled uselessly above a battlefield that had suddenly become irrelevant. Impossible, Marshal Vorthkan stated flatly, his cold demeanor cracking for the first time since the exercise began. Our intelligence indicated that the underground facility was protected by multiple layers of automated defenses. How did 4 humans penetrate security systems that were designed to stop entire armies? Admiral Kethvar found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about warfare as he watched the human team emerge from the tunnel system. They looked exactly the same as they had that morning, slightly disheveled, using equipment that seemed primitive compared to galactic standards, moving with that peculiar combination of apparent clumsiness and hidden purpose. But now Kethvar was beginning to understand that what he had mistaken for clumsiness was actually something far more dangerous. Unpredictability. Captain Chen. The Admiral's voice carried a new note of respect as he addressed the human team leader. Report to the command center for debriefing. I believe we all have much to learn from your performance today. An hour later, the command center had been converted into an impromptu lecture hall as representatives from all 12 galactic species gathered to hear the human team's after-action report. The atmosphere was tense, with many officers still struggling to accept what they had witnessed. Captain Chen stood before the assembled group with the same quiet confidence she had displayed throughout the exercise. Behind her, a holographic display showed the tunnel network that her team had mapped and neutralized. The key to understanding this operation, Chen began, is recognizing that every defensive system has assumptions built into its design. The engineers who created this underground facility made excellent decisions based on conventional military thinking. They protected against frontal assaults, technological attacks, and superior firepower. She gestured to the display, highlighting the various defensive positions. But they made one critical error. They assumed that their opponents would think the same way they did. General Thrax leaned forward, his massive frame creaking as he tried to understand. Explain. The defensive positions were perfectly placed to stop armies that fight the way galactic civilizations have always fought, Chen continued. Heavy assault forces advancing across open terrain. Aerial reconnaissance followed by precision strikes. Technology-based solutions to technology-based problems. These are proven tactics, Wing Commander Scylla protested, her feathers ruffling with indignation. They have won countless battles across the galaxy. Yes, Chen agreed. And that's exactly why they don't work against humans. The silence that followed was deafening. Lieutenant Foster stepped forward, her voice calm and professional as she explained their reconnaissance methodology. Humans developed differently than most galactic species, she said. We don't have natural flight capabilities, so we learn to think three-dimensionally using artificial tools. We don't have superior strength, so we learn to use leverage and mechanical advantage. We don't have advanced energy weapons, so we learn to turn our enemies' technology against them. Sergeant Rodriguez joined the briefing, pointing to specific locations on the tactical display. More importantly, we learn to expect the unexpected. Human military history is full of conflicts where the side with superior technology and natural advantages lost to opponents who refused to fight, according to the established. Shorson, but how did you know where to look? Marshal Vorthkan demanded. Our sensors detected no indication of underground installations. Private Webb grinned, the first time any of the humans had shown anything approaching cockiness during the entire exercise. Because you were looking for what you expected to find, sir. Humans learned a long time ago that the best place to hide something is right where everyone can see it. Disguised as something completely different. He manipulated the holographic display, showing how the tunnel entrances had been camouflaged. Every galactic civilization builds underground facilities the same way. Obvious entrances, heavy security, clear defensive perimeters. But humans have been hiding things underground for thousands of years. We know how to make an entrance look like a natural rock formation, how to disguise air vents as drainage systems, how to route power cables through existing geological features. Admiral Kethvar studied the display with growing fascination. You're saying that your success was based not on superior technology or natural abilities, but on creativity? Not just creativity, Captain Chen corrected. Adaptability. Every other species in this room has natural advantages that allow them to excel in specific types of warfare. But those advantages can become weaknesses when the battlefield changes. She gestured to the assembled officers. The Krithari are unstoppable in open warfare, but underground passages neutralize their size and strength advantages. The Solari have unmatched aerial reconnaissance, but underground facilities are invisible from the air. The Vorthak possess incredible precision weapons, but those weapons are useless if you can't identify the real targets. Humans, Foster added, don't have any natural advantages, so we learn to find advantages wherever they exist. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but we might be the most adaptable. The debriefing continued for another 2 hours as the human team explained their tactics, techniques, and procedures in detail. They demonstrated hand signals that allowed for silent communication in environments where electronic systems might be compromised. They showed how to read terrain features that indicated the presence of underground installations. They explained how to identify the patterns that engineers unconsciously build into their designs, and how to exploit those patterns to defeat systems that were theoretically impregnable. By the end of the session, Admiral Kethvar found himself looking at warfare from a completely different perspective. For centuries, galactic military doctrine had focused on leveraging natural advantages and superior technology to achieve overwhelming superiority. The idea that victory might come from thinking differently, rather than simply thinking better, was revolutionary. Captain Chen, he said as the briefing concluded, I believe I owe you and your team an apology. When I said that humans would participate in this exercise, I intended it as a polite way of acknowledging your presence while expecting minimal contribution. Chen nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond with false modesty or gratitude. Her silence spoke volumes about human expectations and galactic prejudices. However, the Admiral continued, I believe this exercise has revealed something important about the future of galactic defense. We have been preparing to fight the last war, not the next one, and it appears that humans may be uniquely qualified to help us prepare for conflicts that don't follow conventional patterns. 6 months after the exercise on Zentara Prime, Admiral Kethvar stood in his private office aboard the flagship of the Galactic Defense Fleet, staring at intelligence reports that made his crystalline skin dim with concern. The reports detailed a new threat that had emerged from the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim, an enemy force that seemed to defy every conventional military doctrine the galaxy had ever developed. The Devourers, as they had come to be known, fought unlike anything the galactic civilizations had ever encountered. They didn't follow predictable assault patterns. They didn't rely on superior technology or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they seemed to adapt their tactics in real time, turning the established strengths of galactic military forces into fatal weaknesses. 3 star systems had already fallen to these mysterious invaders. In each case, the defenders had followed standard military protocols perfectly, and in each case, those protocols had proven completely inadequate against an enemy that refused to fight according to the established rules. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Sir, came the voice of his aide. Captain Chen is here for her briefing. Appointment. Send her in. Kethvar had requested this meeting after reading the preliminary intelligence analysis that Chen had submitted regarding the Devourer threat. Her assessment had been both disturbing and illuminating, approaching the problem from angles that no other military analyst had considered. Captain Chen entered the office with her characteristic quiet confidence. She had been promoted following the Zentara Prime exercise, and now served as the Galactic Defense Fleet's first human strategic analyst. Her new role was still controversial among some species who questioned whether humans possessed the necessary experience for such responsibilities. Admiral, Chen said, settling into the chair across from his desk. I've completed my analysis of the Devourer tactical patterns. I'm afraid the situation is more serious than our initial assessments indicated. Kethvar activated his desk display, showing tactical recordings from the 3 fallen systems. Our best military minds have studied these engagements extensively. The Devourers seem to possess technology that allows them to counter every weapon system we deploy, neutralize every defensive strategy we implement. That's one interpretation, Chen replied carefully, but I think we're looking at the problem backwards. Explain. Chen gestured to the display, highlighting specific moments in the recorded battles. Look at the timing of the Devourer responses. They don't immediately counter our tactics with superior technology. There's always a delay, usually several hours, during which they seem to be learning. Learning what? How we think, how we approach problems, how we define victory and defeat. Chen manipulated the display to show comparative analysis charts. In the first system, our forces deployed standard Krithari heavy assault tactics. The Devourers initially retreated, apparently overwhelmed. Then, approximately 6 hours later, they returned with countermeasures that specifically targeted the psychological and tactical assumptions underlying Krithari warfare. Kethvar studied the data with growing unease. You're suggesting they deliberately allowed themselves to be attacked in order to study our methods? More than that, I believe they're using our own tactical preferences against us. Every galactic species has developed military doctrines based on their natural advantages. The Krithari rely on overwhelming force. The Solari use speed and aerial superiority. The Vorthok employ precision and technological superiority. These are proven strategies, Kethvar protested. They have secured galactic peace for centuries. Yes, and that's exactly the problem. The Devourers aren't trying to match our strengths. They're exploiting the fact that our strengths have become predictable. Chen called up additional tactical analyses. Look at what happened in the second system. Our forces deployed mixed species tactics, using Solari reconnaissance to guide Vorthok precision strikes while Krithari forces held defensive positions. A textbook combined arms operation, which the Devourers countered by doing something no galactic civilization would ever consider. They ignored the Solari scouts, allowed the Vorthok to waste ammunition on decoy targets, and then attacked the Krithari positions using weapons specifically designed to exploit the psychological impact of being outmaneuvered. Kethvar's multiple eyes focused intently on the tactical display as the implications became clear. You're saying they defeated our forces not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of our psychology? Human military history is full of similar examples, Chen explained. Conflicts where technologically inferior forces defeated superior opponents by refusing to fight according to established conventions. The key insight is that no military doctrine is unbeatable if your opponent is willing to think completely differently about what constitutes victory. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, his crystalline features reflecting the harsh light of the strategic displays. What do you recommend? We need to stop thinking like galactic civilizations and start thinking like humans. Meaning? Chen stood and moved to the tactical display, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she called up star charts and deployment patterns. Every engagement with the Devourers has followed the same pattern. We deploy our forces according to established doctrine. They study our approach, then they counter with tactics that turn our doctrine against us. So we should abandon centuries of proven military strategy? No. We should make our strategy unpredictable. Chen highlighted several star systems along the projected Devourer advance route. Instead of deploying our forces according to species-specific advantages, we deploy them according to mission-specific requirements. Instead of following standard tactical doctrine, we create new doctrine for each engagement. That sounds like a recipe for chaos and confusion among our own forces, maybe, but chaos and confusion are better than predictable defeat. Chen returned to her seat, her expression serious. Admiral, the Devourers have defeated us 3 times using the same basic approach. Learn our patterns, exploit our assumptions, turn our strengths into weaknesses. We need to give them patterns they can't learn and assumptions they can't exploit. Kethvar considered this for several long moments, weighing the risks of abandoning proven military doctrine against the growing evidence that proven doctrine was proving inadequate against this new threat. What specific changes do you propose? Start with mixed species units operating outside traditional tactical roles. Put Cray-3 warriors in reconnaissance positions where their size and strength are disadvantages they have to overcome through creativity. Give Solari scouts close-quarters combat assignments that force them to fight without their natural aerial advantages. Assign Vorthak precision specialists to area denial missions where their technological superiority is less important than their ability to think tactically. You want us to deliberately fight against our natural advantages? I want us to fight in ways that the Devourers can't predict, because we ourselves don't know exactly what we're going to do until we're forced to adapt to the situation. Chen activated a final display showing her proposed deployment plans. The key insight from human military history is that adaptability beats optimization every time. An army that can adapt to any situation will always defeat an army that's optimized for specific conditions. Admiral Kethvar stared at the proposed deployment patterns, seeing tactical doctrines that violated every principle of galactic military science. And yet, given what they knew about the Devourer capabilities, these unconventional approaches might be their only hope. Captain Chen, he said finally, you're asking me to risk the entire galactic defense fleet on the theory that fighting unpredictably is better than fighting effectively. No, sir. I'm asking you to risk the fleet on the theory that unpredictable fighting is the only kind of effective fighting that will work against this enemy. The Kepler 442 system represented everything the galactic defense fleet was fighting to protect. Home to over 12 billion beings across 4 inhabited worlds, it was a center of art, science, and interstellar commerce. More importantly, it lay directly in the path of the Devourer advance, making it the inevitable site of the next major battle. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the most unconventional fleet deployment in galactic history take shape around him. Following Captain Chen's recommendations, he had completely abandoned traditional tactical organization in favor of something that made every military academy instructor in the galaxy question his sanity. Crithari, heavy assault specialists, found themselves assigned to stealth reconnaissance missions, their massive frames forced into concealment roles that required creativity rather than brute force. Solari aerial scouts were embedded with underground tunnel fighting units, their natural flight instincts deliberately constrained to force them to think in 3 dimensions rather than simply relying on vertical superiority. Vorthak precision marksmen had been assigned to area denial missions where their legendary accuracy was less important than their ability to think strategically about battlefield control. Even the disciplined Zephyrians, known for their methodical approach to warfare, had been placed in rapid response roles that demanded split-second decision-making. Sir, reported Commander Yaxtall from the tactical station, the Devourer fleet has entered the outer system. Initial scans confirmed 27 vessels of unknown configuration approaching in irregular formation. Kethvar studied the sensor displays with growing unease. The Devourer ships moved in patterns that seemed almost random, showing none of the tactical precision that characterized galactic military formations. Yet somehow their apparent chaos felt deliberate and threatening. Irregular how? They're not maintaining standard attack formations, sir. No obvious command hierarchy. No clear assault vectors, no protective formations around larger vessels. It's as if each ship is operating independently while somehow remaining coordinated. Captain Chen, now serving as the fleet's strategic advisor, stepped up to the tactical display. They're adapting already, she observed. They know we'll be expecting them to use the same tactics that worked in the previous 3 systems, so they're changing their approach, which means our preparations may be useless, Kethvar said grimly. Not useless, different. Chen manipulated the tactical display to show the positions of their own forces. Look at what we've created. Instead of predictable formations based on species advantages, we have mixed units that can adapt to whatever the Devourers throw at us. What neither the Admiral nor his advisors could see was the true scope of the experiment they were about to conduct. Scattered throughout the Kepler 442 system, thousands of galactic military personnel were being forced to operate outside their comfort zones, to think beyond their natural abilities, to become something more than the sum of their species' evolutionary advantages. On the surface of Kepler 442b, Sergeant Graktul of the Crithari found himself leading a reconnaissance team through the narrow corridors of an abandoned mining facility. His massive frame, normally an advantage in open combat, forced him to think creatively about movement and positioning. Instead of relying on overwhelming force, he had to use stealth, patience, and tactical thinking. "Contact ahead," whispered his unlikely partner, Lieutenant Zilvara of the Silari, her voice barely audible through the communication system. Her natural flight instincts were useless in the confined spaces, forcing her to develop ground-based movement skills she had never needed before. "How many?" Graktol's response was equally quiet, a skill he had never imagined needing in his military career. "Unknown, but they're moving in patterns I don't recognize. Not standard Devourer tactical formations. High above the planet's surface, precision specialist Korthman of the Vorthak found himself responsible for coordinating area denial operations across an entire continent. His legendary marksmanship skills were secondary to his ability to think strategically about battlefield control, resource allocation, and operational timing. All units, this is Control 7. He transmitted to a mixed-species force scattered across dozens of defensive positions. Enemy advance elements are probing our perimeter. Do not engage according to standard protocols. Wait for targets of opportunity and exploit enemy assumptions about our capabilities. It was the kind of tactical complexity that no Vorthak had ever been trained for, requiring intuitive decision-making rather than precise calculation, and yet somehow it felt natural. The first engagement came at 0347 local time, when a Devourer scouting force encountered a mixed patrol unit on the outer edge of the system's asteroid belt. What should have been a routine reconnaissance contact turned into something unprecedented in galactic military history. The patrol unit consisted of 3 Krathari, 2 Solari, 1 Vorthak, and a human advisor. According to standard doctrine, the Krathari would have provided heavy firepower, the Solari would have conducted evasive maneuvers, the Vorthak would have provided precision targeting, and the human would have observed and reported. Instead, the Krathari used their ship's heavy armor to shield the more agile Solari vessels, while the Solari used their maneuverability to confuse Devourer targeting systems. The Vorthak specialist ignored precision targeting entirely, instead using his weapons to create debris fields that limited enemy movement options. And the human advisor, Private Webb from the original Zentara Prime team, coordinated the entire engagement using tactics that made no sense according to established military doctrine. "Webb to all units." His voice came through clearly despite the chaos of combat. "Enemy vessels are adapting to our standard evasion patterns. Switch to random movement, maximum unpredictability. Make them react to us instead of the other way around." What followed was a battle that would be studied in military academies for generations. The patrol unit abandoned every conventional tactic, instead fighting with a creativity and adaptability that the Devourer forces had never encountered. When the enemy adapted to one approach, the galactic units immediately switched to something completely different. The Solari pilot found herself using ramming tactics that should have been suicidal. The Krathari warriors discovered that their heavy weapons could be used for area denial, rather than direct assault. The Vorthak specialist learned that missing targets deliberately could be more effective than hitting them accurately. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. "Fleet Command, this is Patrol 7, came Webb's report as the engagement concluded. "Enemy scout force neutralized. All friendly units intact. Recommend immediate tactical debrief. We've learned something important about Devourer adaptive capabilities." Admiral Kethvar listened to the after-action report with growing amazement. A single patrol unit had not only survived an encounter with Devourer forces, but had actually defeated them using tactics that violated every principle of galactic military science. "Captain Chen," he said quietly, "I believe your theory about human adaptability may be correct. The question now is whether we can scale these tactics to fleet-level operations." Chen studied the tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer main force. 27 ships moving in patterns that seemed random but felt threatening, carrying an enemy that had already proven capable of defeating conventional galactic military doctrine. "There's only one way to find out, sir, and I think we're about to get our chance." The Battle of Kepler 442 began not with the thunderous exchange of heavy weapons or the graceful dance of aerial reconnaissance, but with something the galaxy had never seen before: organized chaos. Admiral Kethvar watched from his flagship's bridge as the most unconventional fleet engagement in galactic history unfolded around him. His forces moved in patterns that violated every principle of tactical doctrine, and yet somehow, those patterns felt right in a way that traditional formations never had. "Devourer main force is adapting to our patrol unit's tactics," reported Commander Yaxtall, his voice tight with concentration. "They're deploying countermeasures designed to neutralize the unconventional approaches that worked in the preliminary engagement." "Of course they are," Captain Chen replied calmly, studying the enemy movement patterns on the tactical display. "They've had 6 hours to analyze the patrol engagement and develop countermeasures, but that's exactly what we expected them to do." Kethavar turned to face her, his crystalline features reflecting the harsh light of the combat displays. "Explain." "The Devourer's greatest strength is their ability to adapt to our tactics by studying our patterns and exploiting our assumptions. But what happens when we don't have patterns? What happens when our tactics are designed to be adapted to and then abandoned the moment the enemy develops countermeasures?" Before the Admiral could respond, the communication system crackled with reports from across the fleet. What he heard challenged everything he thought he knew about military coordination and tactical control. "Heavy Assault Group Theta to Fleet Command," came the voice of Colonel Braxun, a Krathari officer whose unit had been assigned to long-range harassment operations instead of their traditional frontal assault role. "Enemy forces are moving to counter our previous engagement tactics, switching to Protocol Epsilon and moving to secondary positions. Reconnaissance Wing Delta acknowledging," responded Wing Commander Trillax of the Solari, whose aerial specialists had been assigned to underground tunnel warfare. "Enemy countermeasures are targeting our established flight patterns, implementing surface-based evasion tactics and preparing for close-quarters engagement. Precision Strike Team Gamma confirms," came the calm voice of Marshal Korvek of the Vorthak, whose legendary marksman had been tasked with area denial rather than targeted elimination. "Enemy adaptation protocols are focused on our previous precision targeting methodologies, switching to suppression fire and battlefield control patterns." Admiral Kethavar stared at the tactical displays in amazement as his fleet demonstrated a level of adaptability that should have been impossible. Units that had trained for centuries in species-specific tactics were seamlessly transitioning between completely different operational roles, confusing enemy adaptive algorithms that had been designed to counter galactic military doctrine. "How is this possible?" he murmured. "Because we're not fighting like galactic civilizations anymore," Chen replied. "We're fighting like humans." The Devourer fleet, meanwhile, was experiencing something unprecedented in their long campaign of conquest. For the first time since emerging from the galactic rim, they found themselves unable to predict enemy behavior patterns. Every time their adaptive systems developed countermeasures for galactic tactics, those tactics disappeared and were replaced by something completely different. Captain Webb, now serving as tactical coordinator for the entire human advisory team, watched the battle unfold from the fleet's command center with quiet satisfaction. Scattered throughout the galactic fleet, human advisors were implementing the lessons learned from centuries of asymmetric warfare, teaching alien species to think like humans, adaptable, unpredictable, and absolutely refusing to fight fair. "All units, this is Human Advisory Team Leader," Webb transmitted to the mixed species forces. "Enemy adaptation cycles are running approximately every 4 hours. That means we need to change our entire tactical approach every 3 hours to stay ahead of their learning curve." What followed was the most fluid and dynamic battle in galactic history. Every 3 hours, the entire fleet would abandon whatever tactics they were using and implement completely different approaches. Krathari heavy assault specialists would switch from harassment operations to precision targeting. Solari reconnaissance units would transition from underground warfare to long-range bombardment. Vorthak marksmen would shift from area denial to rapid assault tactics. The Devourer forces, designed to adapt to consistent patterns and exploit predictable advantages, found themselves constantly reacting to threats that disappeared before countermeasures could be implemented. Their adaptive algorithms, so effective against conventional galactic military doctrine, became liabilities when faced with opponents who refused to maintain any consistent approach. 6 hours into the battle, Admiral Kethavar received a report that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of the engagement. "Fleet Command, this is Strike Group Alpha," came the triumphant voice of Colonel Braxun. "We have successfully neutralized 3 Devourer vessels using combined arms tactics that, honestly, sir, I'm not sure how to describe in standard military terminology." Strike Group Beta reporting similar success, added Wing Commander Trillax. Our ground-based operations against enemy boarding parties have exceeded all projections. Apparently, Silari ground combat capabilities are significantly enhanced when we stop trying to fight like Silari. Strike Group Gamma confirms multiple enemy vessels disabled, reported Marshal Korvek. Area denial tactics have proven remarkably effective against opponents who expect us to fight with precision rather than creativity. By the 12-hour mark, the impossible had happened. The Galactic Defense Fleet had not only stopped the Devourer advance, but was actively pushing the enemy forces back toward the Galactic Rim. More importantly, they had done so using tactics that the enemy's adaptive systems simply couldn't counter. Captain Chen, Admiral Kethaver said as the surviving Devourer vessels began retreating from the system, I believe I owe you an apology that goes far beyond our conversation after the Zentara Prime exercise. Chen nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond with false modesty. Instead, she manipulated the tactical display to show the broader strategic implications of their victory. This battle proves that human military thinking can be integrated with galactic capabilities to create something more effective than either approach alone, she said. But more importantly, it proves that the galaxy's greatest strength isn't our advanced technology or our natural advantages. What is our greatest strength? Kethafer asked. Our diversity. Every species brings different capabilities, different perspectives, different ways of thinking about problems. When we combine those differences instead of segregating them, when we encourage adaptability instead of specialization, we become capable of things that no single species could achieve alone. The Admiral studied the tactical displays showing mixed species units celebrating victories. That should have been impossible according to conventional military doctrine. Krithari warriors who had learned to think strategically rather than just fighting hard. Silari scouts who had discovered ground-based tactics that complemented their aerial abilities. Vorthak marksmen who had found that area control could be more effective than precision targeting. And humans who had taught them all that the key to victory wasn't being better than your enemy, but being more adaptable. Captain Chen, Kethvar said finally, I believe it's time to completely restructure galactic military doctrine, and I believe humans should lead that restructuring effort. Chen smiled, the first time she had displayed any emotion since the battle began. With respect, sir, I think humans should teach it. But galactic military doctrine should be created by everyone working together. That's the real lesson here. We're stronger when we combine our differences than when we celebrate our advantages. As the Galactic Defense Fleet began the long process of securing the Kepler 442 system and preparing for the inevitable counterattack, word of their unprecedented victory spread across the galaxy. The species that had once seemed clumsy and primitive had not only proven their worth, but had fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about warfare, cooperation, and the true meaning of strength. The Devourers would return, but when they did, they would face an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever produced. A truly unified force that combined the best capabilities of every species while refusing to be limited by the assumptions and traditions that had once defined galactic civilization. And at the heart of that, transformation was a simple human insight, that being unpredictable was better than being perfect, that adaptability was stronger than optimization, and that the willingness to think differently was the most powerful weapon in the universe.